Imagine a place where the horizon stretches infinitely, where the sky meets the earth in an indistinguishable line. A place where the wind is a constant companion, sculpting the sand dunes and lashing the golden grass. This is the heart of Asia, the vast and unforgiving Mongolian steppes of the 12th century. It is not a scenery of dense forests or imposing mountains, but of an austere beauty, a landscape that, at first glance, seems empty, yet pulses with wild life and an incessant struggle for survival. It was a mosaic of nomadic tribes, each a tiny dot in that ocean of grass, in perpetual conflict. Here, life was a daily battle, not only against the elements, but against one's own neighbor. The steppe offered no mercy. The climate was one of brutal extremes, freezing winters that transformed the landscape into a desert of ice, where snow and biting wind could claim lives in a matter of hours, and scorching summers with droughts that decimated herds and turned rivers into cracked beds. Nature was the supreme master, and its lesson was simple: adapt or perish. In this environment, weakness was a death sentence. Compassion, often, a luxury one could not afford. The mindset of resilience was not a virtue, but a condition for existence. Each day was a testament to the human capacity to endure, to fight, and to adapt to a world that showed no forgiveness. In this scenario of extremes, life was intrinsically nomadic. The peoples of the steppe did not build cities or cultivate the land permanently. Their existence was a constant cycle of movement, following the herds, horses, sheep, goats, camels, in search of pastures and water. Their home was the yurt, a round and portable tent made of felt and wood that could be quickly assembled and disassembled. The yurt was the center of family life, a sanctuary of warmth and security amidst the desolate vastness. Inside it, the smell of campfire smoke, fermented milk, and tanned leather was a constant, an aroma that would become synonymous with home.
Mongol society was rigidly tribal. Clans and lineages were the backbone of their social structure, and loyalty to the clan was paramount. However, this loyalty was frequently tested by incessant disputes over pastures, by cattle theft, and, above all, by revenge. Honor was everything, and an affront to a clan member demanded retribution, perpetuating a vicious cycle of violence. War was not a sporadic event, but a way of life, an intrinsic part of existence. Children grew up learning to fight, to hunt, and to survive in a world where force was the only law. The horse was the heart and soul of Mongolian culture. It was not merely a means of transportation, but a companion, a symbol of status, and an irreplaceable tool of war. The Mongols were, first and foremost, unparalleled horsemen. Born in the saddle, they could ride for days on end, sleeping and eating on their sturdy ponies. The composite bow, a deadly weapon fired with precision from horseback, was their natural extension. The speed and mobility of their cavalry hordes were legendary, allowing them to cover vast distances in record time and attack their enemies with devastating ferocity and surprise. Life was hard, but it forged a resilient, adaptable, and incredibly practical people. There was no room for weakness or sentimentality. Each individual was a vital cog in the clan's survival machine. This mindset, shaped by the harshness of the climate and the constant threat from other clans, would create the foundations for the ascent of a leader who understood the steppe in its most brutal essence. While the Mongol tribes squabbled in the steppe, the world around them was dominated by vast and powerful empires, civilizations that viewed the nomads as bothersome barbarians, but who, ironically, would be the next victims of their unified fury. To the south, the mighty Jin dynasty ruled northern China, a rich and sophisticated empire with walled cities, well-organized armies, and a millennial culture. They saw the Mongols as a source of problems on the border, but also as a source of tribute and, occasionally, of mercenaries.
To the west stretched the Khwarezmian Empire, a vast and prosperous Islamic empire in Central Asia. With cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, it was a center of commerce, knowledge, and military power. Its armies were formidable, and its wealth legendary.
Further west, the Silk Road pulsed, connecting east and west, but also exposing the steppe to external influences and tensions. Beyond these great empires, the steppe was dotted with other nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples who were both rivals and potential allies of the Mongol tribes. The Tartars, sworn enemies of the Mongols, were a considerable force, frequently manipulated by the Jin dynasty to keep the steppe tribes divided and weakened. The Merkits, another powerful tribe, were known for their raids and thefts, and would become a personal enemy of Temujin. This fragmentation of the steppe peoples was the norm. There was no unified Mongol identity, only a myriad of clans and tribes, the Karyats, the Naimans, the Ongurats, the Taijut, each with their own chiefs, their own alliances, and their own enmities. They formed and broke coalitions with the fluidity of the wind, fighting for pastures, for prestige, for revenge. Neighboring empires, like the Jin, often exploited this division, playing one tribe against another to prevent the rise of a unified power in the steppe. This was the political reality of Temujin's world, a complex chessboard where survival depended on the ability to navigate between ephemeral alliances and deadly enmities. The steppe was a powder keg, awaiting the spark that would ignite a flame capable of consuming the world.
It was in this cauldron of brutality, fragmentation, and ambition, sometime around the year 1162 AD, on the banks of the Onan River, in the heart of Mongolia, that a boy was born who would forever change the course of world history. His name was Temujin. His arrival in the world was shrouded in legends. It is said that, at birth, Temujin held a clot of blood in the palm of his right hand, a premonition, according to Mongol tradition, that he would be a great warrior and conqueror. This sign, interpreted by his mother and the elders, announced an extraordinary life, marked by bloodshed and the building of an empire. His parents were remarkable figures in themselves. His father, Yusuge, was a brave warrior and chief of the Borjigin clan, a branch of the Kamag Mongol tribe. Yusuge was known for his courage and for having captured a Tatar chief named Temujin Uge, hence his son's name. This choice of name already prefigured the destiny of conquest and revenge that awaited the boy. His mother, Holin, was a woman of unparalleled strength and resilience. Originally from another tribe, the Olkanud, she was abducted by Yusuge in a raid. Her life story, marked by capture and adaptation to a new clan, was already a testament to the harshness of steppe life. Holin would be Temujin's rock in the most difficult years of his life, teaching him lessons of survival, perseverance, and the importance of family loyalty. The environment of his birth was that of the yurt, the smell of smoke and the promise of a nomadic life. But the omens of an extraordinary life were not just legends. They were the seed of an ambition that, one day, would unite the fragmented clans of the steppe and launch them against the empires of the world. Temujin was born into a world of chaos, and it would be he who would bring a new order, forged in fire and blood, to the steppe and beyond. His journey from obscurity to glory was just beginning, and the ancient world would never be the same.
Temujin's childhood in the vast and untamed Mongolian steppes was not a period of carefree games or palatial luxuries. It was, first and foremost, a brutal school of survival, where each day was a lesson about the harshness of life and the unforgiving nature. From his earliest years, Temujin was immersed in nomadic life, the only possible form of existence in this environment. His home was the yurt, a felt tent that, though humble, represented security and warmth against the elements. Inside it, he would learn the first lessons about family cohesion and mutual dependence, essential for the clan's survival. Life in yurts was a constant cycle of movement. Temujin, like all Mongol children, learned to ride almost before he could walk. Horseback riding was not a pastime, but a vital skill, the natural extension of a Mongol's body. He spent hours in the saddle, learning to control the sturdy steppe ponies, to move with them as a single entity. This intimacy with the horse would not only make him an unparalleled warrior, but also give him a deep understanding of mobility and speed, which would be pillars of his future military tactics. Hunting was another essential skill, not only for subsistence, but as training for war. Temujin learned to track animals, to use the bow and arrow with lethal precision, and to work as a team to bring down prey. Each hunt was a battle simulation, teaching him strategy, patience, and the art of ambush. He learned to read the signs of the steppe, to predict the weather, to find water and pastures, and to survive with the bare minimum. The vast and desolate landscape, with its harsh winters and scorching summers, forged in him extraordinary physical and mental resilience. Hunger and cold were relentless teachers, and the need to adapt and persevere was the supreme law. This childhood, marked by hardship and constant threat, shaped Temujin's mentality. He knew no weakness. He understood the reality of the struggle for existence and the need to be ruthless to survive. Every scar, every deprivation, every lesson learned in the steppe would be a brick in the construction of the leader he would become. Temujin's already hard life was turned upside down by an event that would become the deepest scar of his youth, the death of his father, Yesugei. On a return journey from a successful campaign, Yesugei was poisoned by a group of Tatars, sworn enemies of his clan. The death of a chief was a moment of extreme vulnerability for a nomadic family, and the steppe waited for no one.
The impact was immediate and devastating. Temujin's own clan, the Borjigin, which should have offered protection and support to the widow and her children, abandoned them. Led by ambitious relatives, they saw Yesugei's death as an opportunity to get rid of the family of a chief who had been too strong and to claim his possessions and herds. Hoalun, Temujin's mother, and her 7 children, including Temujin, his brothers and half-brothers, were left to fend for themselves, condemned to misery and hunger in the unforgiving vastness of the steppe. The drastic fall in status was humiliating. From a position of leadership and relative abundance, they were reduced to outcasts, hunters and gatherers, living off nature's charity and what they could steal. Yesugei's family, once respected, was now viewed with contempt and pity. Temujin, then about 9 years old, watched his mother, Hoalun, fight with superhuman courage to keep the family together. She hunted, fished, and gathered roots, doing everything she could to feed her children. This image of his mother, strong and unbroken in the face of adversity, would be a constant inspiration for Temujin. But the abandonment by his own clan was a brutal lesson in betrayal. Temujin learned that tribal loyalty was fragile, that power was ephemeral, and that trust was a rare commodity. This experience of helplessness and betrayal forged in him a deep distrust of tribal structures and a relentless determination to never again be vulnerable. The seed of unification, of creating a system where loyalty was guaranteed by merit and not by blood, began to sprout in this time of despair. What didn't kill him made him stronger, and misery became the crucible where the future conqueror would be forged. The years that followed the clan's abandonment were a period of extreme trials for Temujin and his family. The struggle for survival and destitution was constant. Hunger was a daily companion, and cold a relentless enemy. Temujin, still a boy, was forced to mature quickly, to make life or death decisions to protect his mother and siblings. He learned to steal to survive, to hide from enemies, and to fight with a ferocity that surpassed his age. The most traumatic of these experiences was his capture and enslavement by the Taijut, a tribe that had been his father's enemy. Temujin, then about 13 years old, was tied with a wooden yoke around his neck, a symbol of his servitude, and forced to live as a slave. This humiliation, the loss of his freedom, and the constant threat of death were cruel lessons about power and powerlessness.
He witnessed the brutality of the Taijut, the cruelty of his captors, and the world's indifference to his plight.
However, even in slavery, the flame of Temujin's determination did not extinguish. He observed, learned, and planned his escape. On a dark night, taking advantage of a distraction, he managed to escape, using the yoke itself as a weapon to defend himself. His dramatic escape, crossing the steppe under the cloak of night, was an act of pure courage and cunning. He not only regains his freedom, but also reaffirmed to himself that he would never again be subjugated. These years of adversity and slavery were crucial for Temujin's formation. He learned invaluable lessons about betrayal and loyalty, about the importance of freedom, and about the need to be ruthless to survive. The experience of being an outcast, a slave, gave him a unique perspective on human suffering and tyranny. He swore that he would never again allow others to suffer what he suffered, and that he would build a system where justice and order prevailed over tribal chaos. The forging of his determination was complete. The future conqueror had emerged from the depths of misery. The escape from slavery marked a turning point in Temujin's life. He was no longer alone. Slowly, but with determination, he began to build his inner circle, a group of loyal allies who would become the pillars of his future empire. These first companions were not chosen by blood ties, but by merit, by loyalty, and by a shared understanding of Temujin's vision. Among them, legendary figures like Boorchu and Jelme stand out. Boorchu, a young man from a wealthy family, found Temujin in a time of need and offered him help, becoming his first and most faithful companion. Jelme, a skilled blacksmith and brave warrior, also joined him, bringing not only his strength but his practical intelligence. These men were not just warriors, they were friends, advisors, and brothers in arms whose loyalty to Temujin was unquestionable. But the most strategic allies would come from other sources. His childhood friendship with Jamuka, a young chief of another tribe, was a crucial moment. Temujin and Jamuka, still boys, made an Anda and Kem oath, a blood-brother pact that bound them as brothers, sharing everything from food and horses to the burdens of life. This initial friendship, though destined for a tragic end, was fundamental for Temujin's survival in his most vulnerable years, offering him protection and a sense of belonging.
Another vital ally was Togrul Khan, also known as Ong Khan, the chief of the powerful Kereyit tribe. Togrul had been a blood brother of Yesuge, Temujin's father. Temujin sought refuge and support with Togrul, who accepted him as an adopted son. Togrul Khan, an experienced and influential leader, provided Temujin with protection, resources, and, most importantly, a platform to begin building his own reputation and attracting followers. This initial alliance with Togrul would be a crucial springboard for Temujin's ascent, allowing him to learn the complexities of tribal politics at a higher level and gain combat experience alongside a more organized army. These first allies, forged in adversity and mutual loyalty, would be the core of Temujin's army and administration. They were proof that loyalty could be built not only by blood, but by merit and by a shared vision. With his first allies and the support of Togrul Khan, Temujin began his relentless ascent to power. The steppes were a stage of constant skirmishes and battles, and Temujin plunged into this world with a combination of ferocity and strategic intelligence. His first victories were not in large confrontations, but in smaller skirmishes, raids on rival tribes, and rescues of his own herds. Each victory, however small, enhanced his reputation. What distinguished him from other tribal chiefs was not just his courage in battle,
but his innate capacity as a strategist. He understood the importance of speed, surprise, and discipline. He did not fight merely for revenge or plunder. He fought with a greater purpose: to unify the tribes and end the endless cycle of violence. He was a master at using the terrain to his advantage, at coordinating cavalry charges, and at employing rudimentary but effective siege tactics against fortified camps. His reputation grew exponentially. News of his victories, of his ruthless justice, but fair to his followers, and of his ability to protect his allies spread rapidly across the steppe. Temujin's charisma was magnetic. He was not a leader who demanded loyalty by birthright, but one who inspired it by his own strength of character, his resilience, and his promise of a better life. Warriors from other tribes, tired of anarchy and insecurity, began to desert to Temujin's side, drawn by his vision of order and security. He did not just defeat them in battle, he convinced them to join him, promising them a future of stability and prosperity under his leadership. This ability to attract followers, to turn enemies into allies, and to inspire unquestioning loyalty would be one of his greatest weapons. He was building not just an army, but a coalition, a nation in the making, that one day would become the greatest empire the world had ever seen. The battle for power in the steppe was brutal, but Temujin was proving to be the most astute and determined player. Temujin's ascent was not without sacrifices, and the most painful of these losses was the betrayal of his blood brother, Jamukha. The childhood friendship, sealed by the Anda and Kem oath, had been a pillar in Temujin's life. Together they had survived adversity and fought side by side. However, as Temujin's reputation and power grew, the rivalry between the two became inevitable. Jamukha, a talented and charismatic leader himself, could not accept subordination to his old friend. His ambition and his attachment to old tribal traditions, where loyalty was fluid and power disputed, clashed with Temujin's vision of centralized unification. The rupture of the friendship was gradual but decisive. Ideological and strategic differences became clear. Temujin offered a new order based on merit and loyalty to a single leader. Jamukha represented the old guard, the continuity of tribal traditions, and the autonomy of the clans. This rivalry culminated in a series of decisive battles that would shape the future of the steppe. The most notable of these battles was Dalan Baljut, where Jamukha inflicted a significant defeat on Temujin. However, Jamukha's cruelty after the victory, by boiling Temujin's captives in 70 cauldrons, shocked even the brutal standards of the steppe and alienated many of his own followers. This act of barbarity, in contrast to Temujin's relative justice, led many tribal chiefs to begin questioning Jamukha's leadership. The final rivalry came years later, when Jamukha, weakened and without many allies, was betrayed by his own men and handed over to Temujin. The reunion of the two blood brothers was charged with emotion and tragedy. Temujin offered Jamukha a chance to join him, to revive their old friendship, and to rule together. But Jamukha, proud and inflexible, refused. He knew there could only be one leader on the steppe, and that he could not bow to his old friend.
Jamukha's execution was brutal, but to some extent honorable by Mongol standards. He was killed without shedding blood, breaking his spine, a sign of respect for his noble lineage. His death solidified Temujin as the principal and undisputed leader of the steppe. It was a moment of triumph, but also of deep sadness for Temujin, who had lost a childhood friend to the inexorability of ambition and power. Jamukha's betrayal was Temujin's last lesson on the relentless nature of leadership and the price one pays for unification. The path to becoming Genghis Khan was now unobstructed. After decades of struggles, alliances, and betrayals, of bloody victories and painful losses, Temujin had, finally, subjugated all the fragmented tribes of the Mongolian steppes. The chaos that had defined nomadic life for centuries was, for the first time, under the control of a single man. In 1206 AD, on the banks of the Onon River, the same river where he had been born in obscurity, Temujin summoned a Kurultai, a great assembly of all the tribal chiefs, warriors, and clan leaders he had conquered or convinced to join him. It was not just a meeting, it was the foundation of a new era, the birth of a nation. The Kurultai of 1206 was an event of monumental proportions. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of yurts were scattered across the landscape, sheltering the representatives of all Mongol tribes. The atmosphere was one of anticipation and reverence. Before his peers, his former rivals, and his new subjects, Temujin was formally proclaimed their supreme leader. No longer just Temujin, the chief of the Borjigin clan, but Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, or Oceanic Khan. This title was not just a recognition of his military power, but a declaration of his ambition to rule not only the steppe, but the known world. That day marked the birth of the Mongol Empire. But the unification was not just military, it was also legal and social. Genghis Khan understood that, to maintain the cohesion of such a diverse and historically fragmented people, more than brute force was needed. He established the Yasa, a comprehensive and revolutionary code of laws that would govern the new empire. The Yasa was a set of decrees and regulations that covered everything from military organization and civil administration to daily life and morality. It promoted meritocracy, discipline, loyalty, and religious tolerance, while severely punishing treason, theft, disobedience, and disunity.
The Yasa was applied to everyone, regardless of status or tribe, which was a radical innovation in a tribal society where rules varied from clan to clan. It prohibited the theft of cattle, the abduction of women, and warfare between Mongol tribes, crimes that were previously the norm. By doing so, Genghis Khan created a sense of unified Mongol identity, transcending the old tribal divisions. He forged a nation from a mosaic of clans, transforming a chaotic and warlike people into a cohesive and disciplined force, ready to look beyond the steppes and toward the rich empires that surrounded them. The steppe would never be the same. The proclamation of Genghis Khan was only the first step. To transform his vision of a universal empire into reality, he needed a military force that could rival and surpass the armies of the world's most powerful empires. The reorganization of the Mongol army was one of Genghis Khan's greatest innovations, transforming a band of tribal warriors into an unprecedented war machine, the most efficient and lethal of its time. The key to this transformation was meritocracy. Genghis Khan abolished the old tribal divisions in the army. Instead of fighting under their own clan chiefs, warriors were organized into decimal units, regardless of their origin. The smallest unit was the Arban, 10 men, followed by the Zun, 100 men, the Mingan, 1,000 men, and the Tumen, 10,000 men. Promotion and command were not based on lineage or family status, but on skill, courage, and loyalty to the Khan. This ensured that the best warriors and strategists were in leadership positions, regardless of their background. Iron discipline was another pillar. The Mongol army was known for its unquestioning obedience. Disobedience was punished with death, and the desertion of a single man could mean the execution of his entire unit. This discipline, combined with absolute loyalty to Genghis Khan, created a cohesion and combat effectiveness that were unparalleled. Each warrior knew his place and his function, and coordination between units was perfect. Genghis Khan's military innovations were revolutionary. The Mongol composite bow, a powerful and precise weapon, could shoot arrows great distances with devastating force, even from horseback. The Mongols were masters of horse archery, capable of shooting forward and backward with equal precision, a tactic that disoriented and annihilated their enemies.
Speed and mobility were their greatest advantages. They could cover hundreds of kilometers in a few days, appearing where least expected, using their sturdy ponies and the ability to live off the land.
Siege tactics were also improved. Genghis Khan was not content with merely plundering cities, he conquered them. He employed Chinese and Persian engineers to build catapults, battering rams, and other advanced siege engines, adapting his enemy's technology for his own purposes. Psychological warfare was a weapon as potent as the bow. The reputation of their brutality preceded their armies, often leading cities to surrender without a fight. The Mongol war machine was ready to be unleashed upon the world. With his unified and reorganized army, Genghis Khan did not look to the west, to the vast steppes, but to the south, to the rich and powerful Chinese dynasties. His first major campaigns were against the kingdoms that formed the periphery of the Chinese Empire, and these wars would be a crucial school for the future conqueror. The first great conquest was against the Tanguts, who ruled the Western Xia dynasty in northwestern China. In 1209, Genghis Khan launched his campaign against them. The Tanguts were a strong people, with fortified cities and a well-trained army. This campaign was a vital learning experience for the Mongols. They, who were masters of pitched battles and mobile warfare, faced for the first time the challenge of walled cities. Genghis Khan learned the importance of siege tactics and the need for engineers to breach defenses. He did not hesitate to adopt and adapt his enemy's technologies, incorporating captured Chinese engineers into his own army to build siege engines. The campaign against Western Xia was brutal but successful, and the Tanguts were forced to submit and pay tribute. But the real test would come against the powerful Jin dynasty, which ruled northern China. The Jin were a vast and ancient empire, with a massive population, enormous cities, and armies that far outnumbered the Mongols. In 1211, Genghis Khan launched his campaign against the Jin, a war that would last for years and be marked by unprecedented brutality. The fortified cities of the Jin, like Zhongdu, the future Beijing, were formidable challenges. The Mongols, with their speed and mobility, bypassed defenses, isolated cities, and subjected them to relentless sieges. Plunder and destruction were tools of war. Cities that resisted were annihilated, their populations massacred without mercy, their buildings burned, and their fields devastated. This tactic of terror had a clear purpose: to demoralize the enemy and force quick surrender. The campaign against the Jin was a bloodbath, but also a period of intense learning for Genghis Khan. He adopted new military technologies, such as gunpowder, though used rudimentarily by the Mongols, mainly in incendiary projectiles, and perfected his siege tactics. He understood the logistics of large-scale campaigns and the importance of maintaining supply lines. The riches obtained from the plunder of the Jin financed his future campaigns and consolidated the loyalty of his warriors. China, once an unshakable power, was beginning to feel the fury of the universal ruler.
War, for Genghis Khan, was not merely a means of conquest, but a philosophy. His most ruthless and effective tactic was that of terror and annihilation. The reputation of his brutality preceded his armies, often demoralizing enemies before the first arrow was even fired. Cities that resisted were condemned to total destruction, their populations massacred without mercy, their buildings burned, and their fields devastated. This policy was not random, it was a cold calculation. The goal was for fear to spread faster than his horses, for the mere mention of the Mongol name to be enough to break any opponent's will. The message was clear and brutal: surrender and live, resist and die. For those who submitted without a fight, Genghis Khan offered a promise of peace and security.
They would be incorporated into the empire, their lives and properties would be spared, and their leaders might even retain their positions, provided they swore loyalty and paid tribute. This was the Pax Mongolica in its crudest form. Peace imposed by force, but a peace that, for many, was preferable to anarchy and constant war. However, for those who resisted, the fate was genocide. Entire cities were wiped off the map, their populations exterminated to serve as an example. There was no distinction of age or gender. This calculated cruelty, although shocking by modern standards, was seen by Genghis Khan as a strategic necessity. It ensured that there would be no pockets of resistance behind his lines, that his armies could advance without worrying about rebellions, and that the message of his invincibility would be etched in fire and blood into everyone's minds. This philosophy of war, though horrifying, was incredibly effective for the building of his empire. It broke the will of entire nations, forcing them into submission and allowing the Mongols to conquer vast territories with unprecedented speed and efficiency. Genghis Khan's reputation as a ruthless conqueror was his most potent weapon, and he used it without hesitation to mold the world to his will. The vastness of the Mongol Empire at its height was breathtaking. To control a territory that stretched for thousands of kilometers, Genghis Khan needed a communication and logistics system that was as efficient as his armies. He created the yam, a sophisticated relay postal system that would become the vital artery of his vast empire.
The yam consisted of a network of postal stations called yam or yam, strategically located along the main routes of the empire. In these stations, there were fresh horses, food, and lodging for the messengers. The Mongol messengers, known as yamchi, were elite warriors, capable of riding for days on end, covering incredible distances in record time. They traveled at high speed, changing horses and, if necessary, messengers at each station, ensuring that information reached its destination as quickly as possible. This system allowed Genghis Khan and his generals to control their vast army and empire with unprecedented effectiveness. Orders could be transmitted from one side of the empire to the other in a matter of days or weeks, while in other empires, this would take months. Intelligence reports, information about enemy movements, and news of victories or defeats quickly reached the court. The yam was not just a postal system, it was an intelligence network, a means of transportation for troops and supplies, and a vital tool for the administration of the empire. Furthermore, the yam ensured the safety of trade routes, facilitating the movement of merchants and caravans. This boosted the empire's trade and economy, bringing riches and knowledge from all parts of the known world. The yam was a testament to Genghis Khan's organizational genius, a system that, although simple in concept, was revolutionary in its execution and fundamental to the maintenance and expansion of his empire. The unification of the Mongols and Genghis Khan's first conquests were acts of strength and vision, but maintaining power required constant internal consolidation. The steppe, for centuries, had been a cauldron of tribal rivalries, and loyalty, though imposed, needed to be continuously reaffirmed. Genghis Khan did not hesitate to suppress any attempt at revolt or disunity within his newly formed empire. Any tribal chief or group that tried to challenge his authority or return to the old divisions was dealt with exemplary brutality. Punishments were swift and severe, serving as a clear warning to all others. Treason was the most serious crime, and its punishment was death, often for the traitor's entire family. This ruthlessness ensured that discipline and loyalty to the Khan were maintained, and that the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, was respected within the borders of his empire.
The reaffirmation of his power was not only through force. Genghis Khan also used diplomacy and integration. He incorporated the chiefs and warriors of conquered tribes into his own army and administration, offering them positions of prestige and power provided they swore unquestioning loyalty. This created a sense of belonging to the new empire, transcending the old tribal identities. The Yasa, the Mongol code of laws, also played a crucial role in internal consolidation, providing a legal and moral framework that united the empire and promoted order. Internal consolidation was a continuous but successful process. Genghis Khan transformed a fragmented and anarchic people into a cohesive and disciplined nation ready to look beyond its borders and towards the rich empires of the West and South. The steppe, which had been a stage of endless wars, was now the base of a unified empire, a platform from which Genghis Khan would launch his most ambitious and devastating campaigns, forever changing the map of the world. With the unification of the steppes and the first conquests in China, Genghis Khan had transformed his people from fragmented tribes into a cohesive and unstoppable force. But to the east, what stretched out was a new and formidable challenge, an empire that, in its wealth and power, rivaled the greatest civilizations in the world, the Khwarezmian Empire. Situated in Central Asia, this Islamic empire was a colossus, a bridge between East and West, controlling the lucrative Silk Road routes and boasting a culture of sophistication and erudition. The Khwarezmian Empire was a vibrant center of trade. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench were jewels of Islamic architecture, with magnificent mosques, bustling markets, and centers of learning that attracted scholars from all over the world. Wealth flowed through its lands, making it one of the most opulent empires of the time. Its armies were vast and well-equipped, composed of heavy cavalry and archers, and its cities were fortified with imposing walls designed to withstand any invader. Shah Muhammad II, the Khwarezmian ruler, was an ambitious but also arrogant leader who saw himself as the undisputed lord of Central Asia.
However, the arrogance of Shah Muhammad II and his distrust of the barbarians from the steppe would lead to an incident that would ignite the spark of Genghis Khan's greatest and most devastating campaign. The clash between the pragmatic and expansionist mindset of the Mongols and the complacency and pride of an established empire was about to manifest on a catastrophic scale. The fate of the Khwarezmian Empire was sealed by an act of arrogance and short-sightedness. In 1218, the caravan of Mongol merchants sent by Genghis Khan to establish commercial relations arrived at the city of Otrar, an important Khwarezmian trade outpost. The governor of Otrar, Inalchuk, a relative of Shah Muhammad II, suspected the merchants were Mongol spies. Without any proof and acting on his own, he ordered the arrest and massacre of the entire Mongol caravan, confiscating their valuable goods. News of the Otrar incident reached Genghis Khan like a thunderbolt. It was more than an act of piracy. It was a direct affront, an unforgivable insult to his authority and honor. For the Mongols, the violation of hospitality and the murder of envoys were grave crimes, demanding immediate and ruthless retribution. Genghis Khan, in an act of remarkable restraint for his nature, gave Shah Muhammad II a chance to rectify the error. He sent a second embassy, demanding the surrender of Inalchuk for punishment. But Shah Muhammad II, in his arrogance, made a fatal mistake. Not only did he refuse to hand over Inalchuk, but in an even greater act of contempt, he executed the Mongol ambassador and shaved the beards of the others, sending them back to Genghis Khan as a sign of disdain. This was the last straw. Genghis Khan's fury, which had been contained, exploded. He saw this not only as a personal insult, but as a declaration of war, a denial of his authority as universal ruler. For Genghis Khan, this was a just war. It was not a war of conquest without provocation, but a moral and diplomatic affront. He believed that the eternal heaven, Tengri, had granted him the right to rule the world, and Shah Muhammad II had defied this divine order. The decision was made. The Khwarezmian Empire would be wiped off the map.
In 1219, Genghis Khan launched the invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire, a campaign that would become the epitome of his terror and annihilation philosophy of war. He assembled an army of approximately 100,000 to 150,000 warriors, a disciplined and relentless force, and unleashed it upon Central Asia. The speed and brutality of the Mongol conquests were shocking to the Islamic world. Genghis Khan employed his divide-and-conquer tactic with mastery. He divided his army into several tumans, each with a specific mission, attacking the empire on multiple fronts. While one force besieged a city, another rapidly advanced to the next, creating panic and disorganization in the Khwarezmian defenses. Shah Muhammad II, instead of concentrating his forces, dispersed them into fortified garrisons, a strategy that would prove fatal against Mongol mobility. Cities like Bukhara, a center of learning and trade, were the first to fall. Genghis Khan entered the city, gathered the inhabitants in the main mosque, and, from the pulpit, proclaimed himself the scourge of God, sent to punish the Shah's sins. The city was plundered and burned. Samarkand, the legendary city of the Silk Road, resisted bravely, but also succumbed to the relentless Mongol siege engineering and their tactic of using prisoners as human shields. Its population was massacred, and the city reduced to ruins. The campaign against Urgench, the capital of Shah Muhammad II, was particularly brutal. The city resisted for months, and the Mongols, in their fury, diverted the Amudarya River to flood the city, drowning its inhabitants and turning it into a swamp of death. The destruction was so complete that, according to reports, not even the dogs and cats survived. The tactic of terror worked. The reputation of Mongol cruelty spread like wildfire, causing many other cities to surrender without a fight, preferring submission to annihilation.
Shah Muhammad II, in his cowardice, fled from city to city, relentlessly pursued by Genghis Khan's generals Jib and Subutai. He died on an island in the Caspian Sea, an ignoble end for a ruler who had underestimated the Khan's fury. The invasion of Central Asia was more than a conquest. It was a cataclysm that reshaped the political and demographic geography of the region, paving the way for Mongol expansion to the west. While Genghis Khan consolidated his conquests in Central Asia, he sent two of his most brilliant generals, Subutai and Jib, on an audacious reconnaissance expedition to the west. This campaign, which would last for years, 1221 to 1223, was not aimed at large-scale conquest, but at gathering information about the kingdoms beyond the Khwarezmian Empire and psychological terror. With a force of about 20,000 men, Subutai and Jib crossed the Caucasus, an impressive military feat in itself, and emerged onto the steppes of Eastern Europe. They encountered and defeated Georgian and Rus, Russian princes, armies at the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223. The European armies, with their medieval tactics and lack of discipline, were unable to cope with the speed, coordination, and horse archery of the Mongols. The defeat was overwhelming, and news of the arrival of these men from hell spread like wildfire across Europe, causing panic and confusion. This Western campaign was a testament to the reconnaissance capabilities and daring of the Mongol generals. They mapped the terrain, gathered information about the European kingdoms, their military strengths and weaknesses, and reported everything to Genghis Khan. Although Europe was not Genghis Khan's main target at that moment, Subutai and Jib's campaign served as a warning, a premonition of what was to come decades later, when the Mongols would return to launch a large-scale invasion. The expedition also showed the Mongols' ability to operate independently, far from supply lines, living off the land and plunder. They were a self-sufficient and adaptable force, capable of operating in any terrain and against any enemy. Terrorizing Europe, they left an indelible mark on the continent's memory, and the legend of the Devil's Horseman spread, setting the stage for the fear and devastation that would come.
After the devastation of the Khwarezmian Empire and the reconnaissance campaign in the west, the Mongol Empire, under Genghis Khan, reached its territorial apex. The vastness of the controlled territory was unprecedented in history. It stretched from Korea in the east to Russia and Central Asia in the west, and from southern Siberia in the north to northern China and Tibet in the south. It was the largest contiguous empire the world had ever seen, and its diversity of subjugated peoples was impressive. Chinese, Persians, Turks, Russians, Georgians, and many others, all now under the Mongol yoke.
Paradoxically, this era of brutal conquest gave rise to a period of relative peace and prosperity within the empire's borders, known as the Pax Mongolica. Genghis Khan, having subjugated his enemies, now focused on the organization and administration of his vast domain. The Yam system, with its postal stations and road security, greatly facilitated trade and travel. The legendary Silk Road, which had been fragmented by centuries of wars and banditry, was reopened and protected by the Mongols. Merchants, diplomats, missionaries, and travelers like Marco Polo could cross the Asian continent with unprecedented safety, boosting the global exchange of goods, ideas, technologies, and cultures between East and West. The Pax Mongolica, though imposed by force and initial terror, brought stability. Genghis Khan promoted religious tolerance, allowing different beliefs to coexist peacefully in his empire, as long as loyalty to the Khan was unquestioning. He encouraged the exchange of knowledge, bringing scholars, artisans, and administrators from different cultures to serve in his court and in his cities. The empire became a crucible of innovations, where Chinese technologies, such as gunpowder and printing, spread westward, and Islamic knowledge in mathematics and astronomy found its way eastward. The Mongol Empire, at its height, was a unifying force, though brutal, that connected the world in a way never before seen. Genghis Khan, the relentless conqueror, had become the architect of a new world order, one that, despite its violent origin, would lay the foundations for centuries of exchange and development. Despite the grandeur of his conquests and the height of his empire, Genghis Khan's life was not without personal and family challenges. The question of succession was a constant concern, and tensions among his sons over the administration of the vast empire were a source of friction. Genghis Khan had 4 main sons with his first wife, Bert: Jochi, Chagatai, Ogadai, and Toloi. Each of them was a capable warrior and leader, but their personalities and ambitions frequently clashed. Jochi, the eldest son, was talented, but his legitimacy was questioned due to Bert's abduction early in their marriage. This created a lasting tension with his brothers, especially Chagatai, who was known for his inflexible nature. Genghis Khan, in his wisdom, tried to mitigate these rivalries, assigning lands, ulus, and responsibilities to each of his sons. But the seed of discord was already planted. The role of his wives and daughters in diplomacy and governance was also significant. Although Genghis Khan was the supreme leader, his wives, especially Bertay, and his daughters wielded considerable influence. Genghis Khan's daughters were often married to chiefs of allied tribes and kingdoms, serving as diplomatic links and ensuring loyalty through blood ties. They were the princesses of the steppe, and their influence extended throughout the empire. Despite his image as a relentless warrior, Genghis Khan was a family man, and the succession of his empire was a matter of deep personal importance. He knew that the stability of his legacy would depend on his son's ability to rule in harmony. However, the vastness of the empire and the individual ambitions of his heirs would make this harmony a constant challenge, leading to future divisions and conflicts that paradoxically would also drive Mongol expansion beyond the borders he had established. Despite his vast empire and advanced age, Genghis Khan had not finished his conquests. His last campaign was a return to the first great enemy who had challenged his power, the Tanguts of the Western Shah dynasty. In 1226, the Tanguts, who had submitted to Genghis Khan years earlier and promised loyalty and military support, rebelled, refusing to send troops for the Mongol campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire. For Genghis Khan, this was an unforgivable betrayal, a direct affront to his authority and to the Pax Mongolica. The final campaign against the Tanguts was as brutal as the previous ones. Genghis Khan, even ill and debilitated, personally led his army. He was determined to completely crush the rebellion and to set an example for any other kingdom that dared to defy his will. The Tangut cities were besieged and conquered one by one with the same ferocity that had characterized his previous campaigns. The destruction was total, and the Western Shah dynasty was completely annihilated, wiped from history as a lesson to those who dared to betray the Khan. This last campaign was not merely military retribution. It was an act of reaffirming Genghis Khan's power, a reminder that his authority was absolute, and that disobedience would be punished with annihilation. He was ensuring that his empire, even after his death, remained united and feared. The victory over the Tanguts was Genghis Khan's last great conquest, a bloody but decisive end to the life of a man who had dedicated his existence to unification and conquest. He had fulfilled his mission, and the world was about to witness the end of an era and the beginning of a legacy that would echo for centuries.
After decades of relentless conquests, of unification and building an unprecedented empire, Genghis Khan's life came to an end. In August 1227 AD, during his last campaign against the Tanguts, the universal ruler passed away. The exact circumstances of his death are shrouded in mystery and legend, a reflection of the secrecy and mystical aura that surrounded the great Khan. Historical sources diverge on the cause of his death. Some accounts suggest he died of an illness, perhaps typhoid fever, which debilitated him during the campaign. Others recount that he fell from his horse, suffering fatal injuries during a hunt. There are also versions that claim he was wounded in battle against the Tanguts, succumbing to his injuries. Regardless of the exact cause, the fact is that Genghis Khan, the man who had conquered half the world, met his end on the steps he loved so much and had transformed so greatly. The secrecy surrounding his tomb is one of history's most fascinating legends. Genghis Khan had ordered that his final resting place remain a mystery so that his tomb would never be desecrated. According to tradition, all who participated in his funeral procession, including the soldiers who escorted his body and the slaves who buried him, were killed to ensure the secret was kept. Even the horses that trod over his burial site were slaughtered. The Onan River, or a nearby river, may have been temporarily diverted to cover the site, or trees were planted to camouflage it. To this day, the exact location of his tomb remains unknown, one of the greatest archaeological mysteries in the world. This prohibition against revealing his whereabouts was more than simple superstition. It was a final act of power and control, ensuring that his memory remained untouched and that his legend grew even greater. Genghis Khan's death was not the end of his empire, but the beginning of his immortal legacy, a legacy that his sons and grandsons would take to even greater extremes. Before his death, Genghis Khan, with his long-range strategic vision, had established a plan for the succession and administration of his vast empire. He divided it among his four main sons, Jochi, Chagatai, Ogedei, and Tolui, into four great ulus, or khanates. Jochi received the westernmost lands, the Golden Horde; Chagatai, Central Asia; Ogedei, Mongolia and parts of China; and Tolui, the Mongol homeland. Ogedei, the third son, was named the Great Khan, the supreme successor, a choice aimed at ensuring the unity of the empire.
However, this division, though planned for stability, also planted the seeds of future succession disputes. As time passed and Genghis Khan's grandsons took power, the rivalries between the different ulus intensified.
Each khanate sought to expand its own sphere of influence, leading to new conquest campaigns and, eventually, to the fragmentation of the empire into separate, though still powerful, entities. Paradoxically, this fragmentation did not mean the end of Mongol expansion. On the contrary, the ambition of the different khanates led to new waves of conquests, with the Mongols spreading even further west, invading Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and southern China. The Golden Horde would dominate Russia for centuries. The Chagatai Khanate would control Central Asia. The Il Khanate would rule Persia, and the Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, Genghis's grandson, would rule all of China. Genghis Khan's vision of a universal empire continued to manifest, even after his death, through the conquests of his descendants. Despite the brutality of the initial conquests, the most lasting legacy of Genghis Khan and his successors was the establishment of the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. This era of relative peace and prosperity, imposed by force across the vast empire, facilitated as never before trade, cultural, and technological exchange between East and West. The Silk Road, which had been dangerous and fragmented for centuries, was reopened and protected by the Mongols. Bandits and thieves were eliminated, and merchants could travel safely from Beijing to Venice. This spurred an unprecedented exchange of goods, silks, spices, porcelains, but also of ideas, technologies, and knowledge. Gunpowder, printing, the compass and paper, Chinese inventions, traveled westward, transforming Europe. Islamic knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine also spread eastward and westward.
Travelers like Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant, were able to explore the lands of the Great Khan, recording their experiences and opening Europe's eyes to the wealth and sophistication of the East. Christian and Muslim missionaries also traveled freely, spreading their faiths. The Pax Mongolica, although born of violence, created a network of communication and exchange that, in many ways, was the first globalization in history, connecting worlds that were previously isolated. The impact of Genghis Khan and his empire on the world was immense and multifaceted, a duality of destruction and connection. On one hand, the destruction was cataclysmic. The Mongol conquests were marked by brutality and the decimation of populations and entire cities on an unprecedented scale. Millions of lives were lost and entire civilizations were wiped off the map. Flourishing cities were reduced to ruins, and the memory of their culture, in many cases, was erased. The invasion of Central Asia and the Middle East, in particular, caused a cultural and demographic setback that would take centuries to recover. On the other hand, the connection that the Mongol Empire established was revolutionary. The opening and protection of the Silk Road facilitated travel and global exchange, boosting the transfer of knowledge and technology. Europe, which was relatively isolated from the East, was exposed to Chinese and Islamic innovations that would drive its own development. The indirect influence on the European Renaissance through the transfer of knowledge and the reintroduction of classical texts is undeniable.
Innovation was not limited to technologies alone. The Mongol military and administrative heritage, with its meritocracy, discipline, and decimal organization, influenced future armies and empires. The concept of a contiguous and centralized empire, governed by a universal code of laws, was a lesson for many rulers. Genghis Khan, the destroyer, was also, paradoxically, a catalyst for global interconnection and the diffusion of knowledge. How is Genghis Khan remembered today? His image is complex and contradictory. For many, he is the bloody conqueror, the scourge of God, responsible for unprecedented devastation in history. For others, especially in modern Mongolia, he is the founding father of a nation, the hero who unified a fragmented people and led them to glory. In Mongolia, Genghis Khan is a figure of national veneration. His image is ubiquitous, on coins, monuments, and even in the name of Ulaanbaatar's airport. He is celebrated as the man who gave identity and purpose to a people, who forged a nation from tribal chaos, and who built an empire that dominated the world. His image is that of a strong, just, to his own people, and visionary leader.
The myth and legend surrounding Genghis Khan persist. His story is told and retold, adapted for films, books, and games. He became an archetype of the conqueror, the ruthless leader, and the man who, through his sheer force of will, changed the course of history. His life is a testament to the power of human ambition and the capacity of a single individual to shape the destiny of millions. Genghis Khan, Temujin, the universal ruler. His life was a saga of unquestionable brutality, of relentless conquests, but also of strategic and organizational genius that transformed a nomadic and fragmented people into a global force. He was a visionary who through fire and blood forged an empire that connected East and West, forever changing the course of world history. His resilience, his determination, and his ability to inspire loyalty are timeless lessons about the nature of power and leadership. The seeds of Genghis Khan's empire spread for centuries, and his descendants continued to shape the destiny of Asia and beyond. In the next episode, we will delve into the life of Tamerlane, another great conqueror, who centuries later sought to revive Mongol splendor in his own empire, challenging the established order and leaving his own indelible mark on history. His story is the direct continuation of Genghis Khan's legacy, an echo of his ambition, and a testament to the persistence of the spirit of conquest. Don't miss it.